Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here today. I'm Anai, Halftermeyer, and I'm really happy to participate to this event. Thank you to Karën and all the organizers, Aurélie and everyone. So I will deal with the ethical assessment of the impact of digital technologies. This is a joint work with Jean-Yves Antoine, and we are both part of the Fédération ICVL, Informatique Centre Val de Loire, which is the gathering of two different computer science labs, one from Tours and the other one from Orléans, respectively l'IFAT and l'IFO. So I will follow this outline this morning, try to introduce the subject, then make a nuance between deontology and consequentialism, then follow try to present some guidelines, principles, or actually a landscape in which we frame our work, present briefly our typology, and see what's next. Then, once upon a time, as Karën said this morning, actually, we were part of the first edition of Éthique et TAL. And well, 10 years ago now, we produced with a few colleagues like Willy and Virginie, a first version of a risk typology from a consequentialist point of view. So in order to present this a little bit more, I will make a first nuance between deontology and consequentialism. Then, since I am the first one to present this morning, I will allow myself a definition of what ethics is. So we define it as being self-regulation developed by community and based on reflection and moral principles. So I would like to draw your attention on the fact that it has to be developed by a community. This is not prescription, right? Ethics needs to be emergent reflection by a community around all the stakes that are the concerns of this community. For instance, it's really hard to teach ethics, right? It has to be an emergent reflection. Deontology on its part is a respect for moral principles without consideration of effects. And this is something that is really important for us because we adopt a consequentialist point of view, which make quite a big distinction with deontology. Deontology is supposed to be kind of a prescription of the good way or the bad ways, of identifying the bad ways of doing things in a field, mostly professional field, right? So we are trying to make an ethics reflection following a consequentialist point of view. Then we can define consequentialism as being the analysis of the consequences of an action. So we take into account the impacts, the consequences, and it can be defined as being a theological approach focused on purposes. Then it has to be distinguished from utilitarianism. I follow here the last bullet of the slide, which is basically maximizing the good of all parties being the self for egoism and the others with altruism. Here, utilitarianism tries to maximize, as I said, the good. And in the consequentialist point of view, we are not trying to maximize the good. We're trying to evaluate the consequences, actually either they're good or not. So a small distinction here that is to be taken into account. Then if I draw kind of a landscape for our work, I will talk just a few seconds about principles and guidelines that have been published about and have been created about the impact of digital technologies. Since we can, since the 80s, we can mention, just for one example, PAPA principles about privacy, accuracy, property, accessibility, principles that have to be observed from an ethics point of view, since we deal with data. If we think about algorithms, we can add transparency and fairness and many others. And if we take into account the different stakeholders in the society, we can talk about, for instance, the Future of Life Institute, who has proposed the Halftermeyer principles. Well, the Future of Life Institute, it's a digital technologies magnet, like Elon Musk, for example. And if we try to observe what the countries and political instances have proposed, we can just mention the European Union with the AI Act, which has been promulgated in January, very recently. And the Canadian government, for example, with this tool, which is online, actually, to evaluate different digital technologies. Here, the European Union AI Act, for example, they have proposed a kind of a consequentialist approach, since they make a different typology of levels of risks. But one little criticism we can make is that it's really directed on oriented, how can I say, on the technologies themselves. Right? They take a technology, then they try to evaluate it. And we have actually the exact opposite methodology. Then I will go back to this later on. Just to mention a few services, but there are loads as well. For instance, Jobin in 2019, the Global Landscape and AI Ethics Guidelines, they made a review of 84 papers, and it's already been 5 years ago now. And we can mention as well Wadinger and Shelby, 2022, 2023, who propose taxonomies for different digital technologies. For the first one with the language models, and for the second one with the different algorithmic systems. So we are, how can I say, we are framing our work in this kind of works. Then let me introduce very quickly our typology. We based our work on the notion of risks first, according to the 3 following notions. The first one is risk factor. Risk factor is the technology itself, right? It's the thing that would provoke an impact. And vulnerability, the second bullet here, is the object which is impacted, right? The third one is criticality. It's the combination of the interface between risk factor and vulnerability weighed by the probability of occurrence. And we will focus here on the risk factor, the interface actually between risk factor and vulnerability. So what is the source of the impact, the risk, and what is impacted. Criticality is really interesting, and actually it has to be taken as a track to evaluate, but this is not in the scope for now in our work. Then, just to make detail about our methodology, it is not initiated by the observation of new technologies. As I said earlier, most of the time when we read papers, when we try to find other works on the kind of ethical evaluation following a typology, most of the time it's been created on the technologies itself, trying to think about the technology and then try to think about all the different impacts. We had exactly the inverse methodologies, thinking about what can be the different risks, what are the object of vulnerabilities, and then make a complete typology on this. So, for instance, we got inspired by the World Health Organization typology about health impacts in order to complete this typology. Then it is not a checklist, because we really want this work to be an ethical reflection. So it's not a closed list, right? A closed typology. Then once the typology is built, it is still open. It has to evolve, right? And afterwards, we want to plug actually the different technologies in the different risks we have already identified. Then, just for a reminder, this typology was first created 10 years ago, as I said, and Willy Allègre, sorry, who is a colleague from the CARPAP Rehabilitation Center in France, in Bretagne, has implemented it as an ontology on web protégé. And actually, just to ground a little bit our approach, Willy and Jean-Yves, and actually it's a still ongoing work. We have all worked on the AAC. AAC, it's a keyboard, a virtual keyboard to help disabled people to access communication. And this keyboard allows the person to plug an eye tracker, for example. So if you have someone who is completely paralyzed and who can only select a letter, select a key on the keyboard, so you plug an eye tracker, and this is completely plugged to the virtual keyboard. Then in this kind of tool, you can plug as well an help for suggestion of words or completion or correction of the words. So that's why we started. Think about it, because this kind of technology is used as well for children. And children, when they are in the phase of acquiring spelling, for example. So I will just develop a little bit this interface between risk factor and vulnerability. So Willy Allègre, first made it an ontology on web protégé, and I will show you the whole schema. So if we follow I hope this is readable. Well, we have 3 different classes here, and there is another one to add, but I will talk about it later. So the first part, the upper side of the slide, is like the classes. It's the concepts in our typology, in our ontology, actually. So everything with the yellow dot here. Object of vulnerability, that's what we have developed first. Individual, society, environment, and I will just follow one branch, but you can imagine that it is all developed over there in order to develop this example. So if you follow individual cognitive risk, then change of cognitive abilities, then developmental delay, for example, and as leaves in our typology, you have spatial function, memory delay, temporal function delay, motor control delay, and language delay, in which we plugged. This is not a class anymore. This is an instance in our ontology. Spelling impairment. That's an example. Spelling impairment, that's a type of, its type actually is language delay. And it is linked to AAC spelling impairment. As I told you, AAC is like the keyboards, the virtual keyboards, in order to help disabled people to communicate. And this is the interface between risk factor and the risk factor and the impact itself, right? So if we follow this link, AAC is the technology itself. That's the risk factor. As I told you, this is the class risk factor. And here I've just added few technologies, but it's not complete yet, right? So for example, large language models, home automation, Amazon Mechanical Turk has to be plugged in the same way as an interface between risk factor and impact. Okay, so just for you to see how it looks like, you can completely access it since you have an account, and you are allowed to comment and for sure make increasement in this. So for example, you can see this. What's interesting is, like, if you go in the individuals and take AAC, you've got this representation. So I will just go back to the presentation quickly. There we go. This was my backup, just in order to cope with internet problems. Well, anyway, so here, the AAC, as I told you, the technology is a risk factor of AAC spelling impairment, which is a factor of the risk language delay and language regression, for example. And on the other side, I told you about the last class, which is impact itself, spelling impairment as the type of language delay and language regression. But we can talk about it later in the question if you want. Then we wanted to ground it in related works. And actually, if we take Shelby et al. 2023, they propose a typology in order to reduce harm caused by digital technologies, which is the same purpose as ours. And they made a comprehensive scoping review with 172 studies in computer science, which is really interesting and really, really meaningful to us. But if I just quote the different harms, you have representational harms, allocative, quality of service, interpersonal, and social system harms, which is actually focused on social and psychosocial harms, social stereotypes, social disparities, interpersonal harms, system and societal harms, which is actually not considering individual and environmental vulnerabilities. That's the one of the biggest difference between their work and our work, because we try to make first the big typology, right? Trying to take into consideration, for example, individual and environmental harms. The implicit focus is on technical consideration. It's linked to model bias, sorry. Then this is actually different from our approach, which is more technology agnostic, as I said. Then what's next? Actually, we need to make an exhaustive review of the literature. So this typology has been created 10 years ago, and we kept on feeding it. But, well, especially Jean-Yves, we're smiling, I can see it. But yes, loads of meta reviews and surveys have to be taken into account in order to feed completely this typology. Then we are processing the ongoing updates now, and actually we look for partners to participate. That will be my last word for this morning. Thank you for your attention.